workflow with Vectorworks. This presentation will begin with an introduction to design principles specifically targeted to the early phases of the creative workflow in BIM. Presenting this webinar are Steve Alden and Rubina Siddiqui, whose work with architects is to understand their needs and goals and to demonstrate how Vectorworks BIM workflows can benefit their projects. Steve Alden oversees Nemetschek Vectorworks sales and marketing strategies in the United States. Steve is also a licensed California architect and member of the American Institute of Architects. Rubina, on the other hand, previously worked as a project architect and BIM manager for firms focusing on institutional projects, particularly school. Before that, she was a geologist. Go figure. And Rubina is also a member of the American Institute of Architects. Before we get going, here's an overview of what we do at Novedge. Novedge is one of the largest online design software stores. We offer a huge assortment of software solutions that cater to virtually every designer's need. Put us to the test and come visit our webpage at novedge.com. For news and specials, you should always check the Novedge blog. Keep up with the latest software updates and enjoy inspiring interviews. You can also get daily software news following us on Facebook, Google+, and Twitter. For more details on future webinars, we encourage you to subscribe to our mailing list so you can get real-time information and updates on your favorite software demos. And here's the link, novedge.com/news_subscribe ASAP. And if you missed something or today's presentation, you can always check it out on our YouTube and Vimeo channel. Everything is recorded, and just check for our Novedge channels, and the presentation, as always, is free. And now I'm ready to let the stage to Steve and Rubina. Are you guys ready?
We are. Thank you.
Okay.
Barbara.
I'll make you the presenter, and it's showtime.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our Vectorworks webinar. I'm going to go ahead and show my screen. We'll get right into it. Looking all right on your end, Ruby?
Looks
okay,
good.
Good. Again, I'm Steve Alden. I'm an architect with Nemetschek Vectorworks here in Columbia, Maryland. I moved out here about 3 years ago from California, so I'm pleased to be working with Novedge out of San Francisco on this. Ruby has been with the company, what, 3 years now, Ruby? About 3 years. She joined about the same time I did, a little bit after. And Ruby, as Barbara said, has been involved as a design manager for BIM projects in a mid-size or large firm in Washington, D.C.
Both.
Both. And we started working on a concept here at Vectorworks a number of months ago that was, we wanted to explore the process of design moving into a BIM workflow, but always starting from a designer's point of view or perspective of how do architects and designers really think and work out all the details in their project. So we developed this program or this presentation called Sketch to BIM with Vectorworks. We really wanted to explore the capabilities of Vectorworks through a complete workflow, beginning with sketches. I'm going to ask Ruby to talk a little bit about the National BIM standard, because what we're dealing with ultimately is moving projects into a BIM workflow.
And the point of these slides really is just to make people aware of the fact that as a provider of BIM software, Vectorworks is involved in the evolution of these national BIM standards here in the United States, along with a lot of the large software vendors such as Autodesk and Graphisoft and so on. And the point is really that this is something that we see being very important in how it's going to start becoming integrated into an architect's workflow on a regular basis on their day-to-day tasks.
And this is really from that national BIM standard. The thing that really caught my eye when I started thinking about the Sketch to BIM program was understanding what is BIM. a lot of people are wondering what is BIM, and of course there are a lot of definitions for it, but I figure what better place to start than the National BIM Standard, right, if you want a definition of what BIM is. The thing that caught my eye on this was the second statement here, that BIM is a shared knowledge resource for information about a facility, forming a reliable basis for decisions during its life cycle. Sounds pretty wordy, but then they added this at the bottom. Life cycle defined as existing from earliest conception to demolition. Well, my background has always been in design, in architecture, more so than in production documentation. So when I saw earliest conception as part of the BIM process, I thought, well, we better really look at what that means, because in my mind, earliest conception always begins with this, begins with sketches and ideas, and that is traditionally not considered part of a BIM workflow. But perhaps if we follow the National BIM Standard, we may want to consider how those early ideas can be pushed into a BIM workflow as soon as possible in the process. So the way we decided we would explore this, it was about a year ago, I think it was, wasn't it, Ruby,
Yeah.
that we developed this sketch to BIM concept working with Architectural Record. We sponsored some of the things that they were doing, and they sponsored some of this. Ultimately, what we developed was a way for users who came to our website and also to the Architectural Record website to vote on what kind of a project they would like to see us develop using the sketch to BIM concept of going from early ideas all the way through a BIM workflow. So what happened is we developed at they would vote on things, and we developed schemes based on what they were interested in seeing, and ultimately they selected an eco-resort as the kind of project they wanted to see. The last round of voting, we proposed 3 different eco-resorts, one that was seaside, one that was desert-based, and one that was Arctic-based. And they ultimately came back and said they wanted to see the seaside one. So we chose as a site to go to Malta. We decided early on in the process that we thought, if you're going to do an eco-resort, what better place than in the middle of the Mediterranean, where you can have a lot of oceanographic research vessels coming in and doing research not only on the Mediterranean, but on oceans around the world as well.
And have beautiful views.
And have beautiful views, thank you. So we started by looking at Malta and saying, well, let's use this as our site, but let's not make it easy on ourselves. Let's not take a flat site somewhere. Let's take a pretty hilly site. So that's another reason we liked Malta, because the terrain is rugged. You want to talk about how we went ahead and did this, Ruby?
Sure. So we had to visit the Malta Planning Authority in order to gain site information, to get topographic information. Now, traditionally in Vectorworks, if there was GIS information or shape files that you could download, you'd be able to bring them directly into Vectorworks in order to build the site model. But here we had to go the traditional route and trace out contour lines. But from there, it was easy enough to begin generating the site model that you see here. And I believe that we were working with 1 meter contours to generate this part of the site where we wanted to begin our project.
Right. The website that we got from the Malta government there, when we researched it, they indicated 10-meter contours, and then we converted with the terrain tools in Vectorworks, converted it to 1-meter intervals so that we could see the terrain a little better. And what we saw right away was that we've got a very steep site. But we knew that that was the one thing that we couldn't ignore when we start the planning, so we had to start with something that we knew. So whenever you design, you have to take what you know for sure, and then you have freedom to move around that, but you're going to be restricted or constricted or influenced by these things. So once we knew that the site was going to play a major role and the elevation next to the Mediterranean was going to play a major role, we could then get in and start doing our sketching and our design, knowing that we were probably going to be dealing with some sort of terraced architecture going down to the sea. And if we're going to take things off of a research vessel in the Mediterranean, we're probably going to need some sort of a structure away from the shoreline where we get deeper water, and then provide a bridge or a mechanism by which things could be taken off the boats into the research labs. So what you're seeing here is really the very earliest sketch that we did. to say, well, how are we going to lay things out here? And Ruby, if you want to talk a little bit about the layout of these pieces that we have.
Right. So part of the early exercises with these sketches was kind of a larger master planning and developing a relationship with all the programmatic pieces. And as Steve mentioned, on the very bottom there, we have that harbor structure, which would accommodate the research vessels and the people coming on to the island and up to the research resort. On the far left, that area was designated for the housing. We're foreseeing long-term housing needs for people who were there at the research facilities for long periods of time. The main focal point was a plaza area that leads into the main labs facilities and research facilities, and on the right was a larger theater area. And I believe the program here was meant to provide a space for delivering information regarding research that's being conducted and so on and so forth.
Yeah, the idea was that what people had asked us to create was an eco-resort, so we knew there had to be a tourist component to it, which is another reason we liked Malta, because it is a tourist destination. There's an international airport very close to this site. People are not using cars when they're coming here, so we like the idea that people could come into the facility through other means of transportation, such as boats coming into the harbor and other things. So we were building basically a resort that would also be a place to interact with scientists as they do their studies. So when we started with the site, because we had the contours, one of the first things we did after we did the sketching, as you can see we can lay the sketch out, is to start to experiment with the cut and fill, and we can do that in Vectorworks very easily by sculpting with site modifiers right on the terrain and then looking at the cut and fill calculations to make sure that we're balancing cut and fill as we're building basically the terracing system that will support the architecture here. And again, the nice thing about Vectorworks is we're able to do that very quickly, and at the same time, even though it's like sketching out the contours, we're actually using very good information informing us about whether this makes sense as far as cut and fill calculations. We really want to build this model, build the information into the model, just like BIM says, building information modeling. This is what we're trying to do. Every step we make, every decision we make, we want it to be grounded with good research and good information. So with that in mind, once we had done the terracing, and because we had done a sketch that kind of laid out rough areas, we then went and we started to define more completely what these zones are, and we also began to give them uses for the different parts and actual spaces, not only square footages, but volumes. Once we had volumes, we're able to, in essence, query those massing models for area calculations, and that helps give us an idea of how large these components are going to be and how they're going to relate to one another spatially. So we set up a bunch of different uses. You can see that we have color coding here to help us remember what's going on here and help to identify certain areas. For example, the blue boxes, that's kind of the resort housing area that we had assigned. There's a couple plazas associated. There's a center labs in the middle in the red color. The yellow, this was an important part of the concept too, Ruby, as you remember. This is what we call the TED Talk Theater. We knew that because we had a resort and we knew we had a lot of scientists there, that we were going to have a major theater facility adjacent to the labs that would be servicing the needs of people coming in to see the event. So we have a theater. And we anticipated having a rather large harbor structure because we're going to have vessels coming in, and we knew we needed a bridge system that would offload from ships across to the plaza. So this was where we started, and as Ruby said, we're able to calculate the sizes of all these pieces. And we ended up with kind of these shapes here. Now, with Vectorworks, we're doing a certain kind of a modeling that we talk about here, which is kind of what I guess I would call incremental modeling, where we're not really concerned about what does the thing look like right now. We're really trying to just gather information on how big these spaces are, not really necessarily what they look like, more where they're located and how big they are. And in that regard, it's really not that much different than what a lot of firms do, a lot of designers do when they're even working with very early design and they're not using a computer. They're just doing mass modeling. They're just kind of testing ideas and seeing how things might fit together. That's essentially what we're doing here. We're just doing some, I guess I'll call it mass modeling.
Mm-hmm.
So what we started with then, we decided, well, let's just start with the labs because we know how labs are put together. There's plenty of material on how labs are constructed. And so going right into Vectorworks, we very quickly took a lab footprint that we knew was a successful footprint or an appropriate footprint, and we created a typical lab floor. Now we know this is a good size for all these pieces because we actually were using good material to start with, and we stacked it up. We ended up stacking looks like 4 levels high at this point. And then we went back and we dropped that early stacking plan right onto the site model. And we also created a transparent version of the massing model so that we could know where things are in a transparent mode so we could see where to put the labs. And also we wanted to see, well, how are these labs fitting on the site? And by looking at this, we realized when we started putting all these pieces together that we actually had room underneath what we had created for a public area, and we had room above. The grades were so high at that point that we actually could go higher, not a 4-story building, but a 6-floor building. So we decided let's go ahead and begin to experiment with the design a little bit. Do you want to talk about that?
Right, so as Steve mentioned, we noticed that there was an opportunity to kind of bring that bottom plaza area into the building, and that helped inform kind of the rounded plaza space that you see here. It was an opportunity to engage that public area with that labs building, and also it gave us the opportunity to create a larger multi-story space as a grand entrance into the building for the more public areas within the labs facility.
Yeah, the nice thing about the design process and what I call incremental is we didn't know that we were really going to create this what I call a horseshoe rotunda in there until we actually started to see the pieces coming together on the site and realized we began to be concerned that the plaza may not be big enough to handle the number of people in there. And then the idea came up, well, why don't we extend the plaza into the building in such a way that people are sometimes in the plaza and sometimes in the building, and we'll kind of blur the distinction about when you're in the building and when you're in the plaza. Because after all, Malta, the climate allows you to be indoors and outdoors quite a bit. It's a Mediterranean climate, so we began to experiment with it. We also built on the top deck, we created a conference center. So we actually added 1 floor to the top. The nice thing about the conference center is when you access it from the back of the building, you're actually at grade. But when you access it from the ocean side or from the seaside, you're actually looking at it at the 6th floor. So we like the idea that people could come to the conference center from grade level in the back of the facility if they're coming by bus from the city or from the airport, be at grade, and also be in a protected area where you're well above the plaza and the public areas.
I'd just like to interject that here we're using some of the basic out-of-the-box modeling tools in Vectorworks. So we're using unstyled wall tools. We're using basic massing, push-pull modeling type of tools within Vectorworks.
Yeah, and as we're doing this design, we're also able to go back into Vectorworks and begin to add. When I talk about incremental design, we're beginning to add things. We've got the rotunda coming in, but then we thought, well, let's go ahead and add some architecture on the outside because we've got the opportunity since we decided to create a plaza where people are in and out of the building. Well, let's extend the building out on top of the plaza in an outdoor fashion and then begin to put a facade on the building. So we're really kind of designing this as we're gathering information about how we're going to use the building. We now know how tall the building is. We now know that the first 3 floors incorporated a large rotunda. We now know that we want a plaza that welcomes people into the building and out of the building easily. So we can begin to design our building to reflect these things that we want to incorporate into the design. And this was really a good point where we thought, well, we need to become a little more aware also of what the next step of the design should be. One of the early thoughts was to enclose glass walls here where you see the openings on the facade. But we thought, well, let's use some of the smart tools in Vectorworks and find out one thing that we needed to know right away is, are we creating, for an eco-resort, an energy problem by having too much glass in the wrong place? So you want to talk about the Heliodon a bit?
Right, so we used the Heliodon tool, which allows you to set the location of your project, and it can get very specific. And the Heliodon tool represents a sun source, so you're able to do live sun studies, shade studies, and you're able to animate that sunlight source based on the time of day or the day of the year in order to see what that impact is going to have on your project year-round.
Yeah, what this told us right away was what we had intended to be glass walls. We decided, no, we've got too much sun coming in there. We need to recess the glass and make these basically outdoor spaces that are like balcony areas off of the large lab areas. So that allowed us to take the design to the next step. So while we're working on the lab building, though, we'll swing around to the other side, and remember I mentioned the theater that we wanted to have, a live TED Talk theater, and our earlier programming document had located it here on the right side, and we began to rough out a concept for it, but we realized that our early programming, we had put in a seat count of about 200 seats, and we thought, well, this is looking awfully small for this site. This isn't quite looking right to us, and so we did a little bit of research by going into TED Talk theaters and seeing, well, what happens in a TED Talk theater? How many people come into these facilities? One of the first things we noticed when we started counting heads in here is, for example, this lower tier has 200 people, and that was what we were counting on for our overall theater at the beginning. We hadn't even taken into account this whole upper deck and the height of the ceilings and all the stuff that goes on up above. We realized right away that we need to have some theater design guys involved in the project and a bigger theater. So what we did is we took away all of the stuff that we had there in that theater location, and we knew that we had to redesign a new theater. So we had a separate team come in and start to design an 800-seat theater using the proper rakes on the seating and the proper orientation of everything. And it was a simple matter in Vectorworks to go in and create a design layer viewport and reference the work that the theater designer was doing right into our model. We didn't have to do it ourselves. The theater designers were going to create that for us, and we were just going to drop it into the model so that we could see it in real time. Whatever they were adding to it, we would be able to see in our lab model. And so we could only need to worry about working on our lab. At the same time, the theater designer can see how this theater is connecting to the labs because they're going to be dealing with circulation and those issues as well. So to move ahead, this is kind of where our labs building has become kind of a terraced facility going down. Remember I talked about how you enter from the upper level at grade, and it terraces down to this big rotunda. So this is, you can see, we started with very boxy shapes, very simple shapes, and now we're getting into some, what I would call some serious architectural design in here. If I go back into Vectorworks here and just take a look through one of the section tools, Ruby, what's that called where we do the section where it does the perspective? I can't remember. In Vectorworks,
it's an option through the Create Section Viewport.
Create Section Viewport. And if you want to do a section through the building, I really like this because it's a complicated space to show, to illustrate. Let's say you're trying to show a client what this space looks like. If you do a straight section, it's really hard to illustrate the fact that you've got this big rotunda space. But by using that feature in Vectorworks, I was able to actually project behind and show the perspective behind the section cut, which is really a lot of fun. Once I had that, it was just a simple matter of defining these levels. I've got the plaza. We decided to put an exhibit hall on the second level and then a research library, all of these being more or less public spaces. We'll get into some lab spaces, which are a little more secured areas, would be 2 floors of research labs, and then we would have a conference center at the top that I mentioned. So this was our design. Looking at the terracing that we had created, you can kind of see how it cuts into the site there. This is just a representation of what our retaining wall system was going to be. As we come around here and you're on a lower level, This is that rotunda public area that we talked about, and you can begin to see the beginning of the theater happening at the top of the page there, where you come in and there's some escalators in there that are going to take you up to the theater level. The theater actually starts at the exhibit level on the second floor up. You can see that the first floor is rather narrow. It's not very deep because the way that this thing is terraced in, there's not much room there, but we wanted to give the building the impression that it cuts in deeper, so every floor that gets added to this thing makes it look like the building is deeper. So the next floor comes up. You can begin to see the theater incorporated into it. Right here we've got this wall. This is kind of an interesting thing to talk about too. I don't know if Ruby, you want to talk about how we did how we used the symbols and the components here.
Right. So the curtain wall was something that also went through an iterative process where we kind of explored how we wanted this to look like within the actual building. And what we began to utilize here was Vectorworks symbol technology. And what we did was, in a separate file, we began to just create some generic models as we put pieces together to represent the curtain wall, and we would plug it into the main model. And as we made changes based on how it looked and how it was in relationship to the rest of the building elements, it would reflect directly into that symbol reference.
Yeah, what I really loved about this, just like when we started with the incremental process with the boxy shapes, we did the same thing with the curtain wall. The first thing was just some rough forms, but because we were using the symbol technology and we were using components that actually created the symbols, by just changing one piece, we could change it throughout the entire model. We could change the curtain wall, and we went through about 6 or 8 different iterations to come up with a system for the curtain wall. It was so easy to do because we would just need to change one component, and then it would be reflected automatically through the whole facade. And we could see whether we liked where that was going, what that was doing for us. So it was a nice way to do that process. We'll go up one more level. Now we're up into the research library, and you can see it's beginning to connect to the theater very nicely. The theater designers are paying attention to what these connections are to the different levels in the labs. And now the idea is developed where we're up on the 3rd floor, and we actually have access to the upper level of the theater. So that, again, is part of this incremental design, opened up this idea of a private box portion to the theater where people who are in a higher security component, like they're involved in labs, can actually come in, watch presentations in the TED Talk Theater, be in a soundproof area where they can talk among themselves while the presentation's going on, come and exit at their own rate and not bother anybody who's coming in, let's say, from a resort standpoint watching a presentation. So we're getting some really good connections between different teams working on different functions here. We'll go up one more level, and this is kind of fun too. This is where we get into the labs. And again, Ruby wants to talk about how we use the symbol technology here as well.
So within these floors of the lab suites, or within the lab, we had modular office suites, which we actually handled very similarly to how we created the curtain wall, in that we would create a singular module as a symbol, and we would place it, we would copy it in all the different areas and locations where it needs to occur, and we were able to then do kind of a study of all of those modules in relationship to each other, and then we were able to make changes and iterations within that module again and see it reflected throughout all of the pieces. So again, it goes back to the incremental design and being able to really move things around and go through different iterations of things as we put the pieces together.
Yeah, this again, like the curtain wall system was a little different. That was kind of the changes that we made were kind of cosmetic. Does it look one way or look another way? In this case, we were actually dealing with the actual offices and facilities, and it took a little bit of time to figure out that we're actually going to create these pie-shaped pieces so that it fits the floor plan. The earlier thinking was more of a grid system of offices, and it wasn't until we started to play around with this more that we realized, well, we've got a great opportunity to configure something that repeats and respects the kind of geometry that the building is beginning to take on, this giant curved wall. And by playing with these pieces, we were able not only to come up with a plan that makes sense and works and can be reproduced many times with few pieces being designed and developed, but also it's beginning to open the gate or the doorway to how the fabrication of the actual pieces will take place. When the partition system gets built, we can use these partitions that we've already designed the symbols for the elevations of what the partition is, how big it is, where the doors are. All of these things can then be laid out on the sheets to help with the fabrication of the interior partitioning. So for us, it was a great way to go. We look at the facade now, and you can come around and see we're kind of looking at the 6 floors here, and we feel like this has got a nice look as far as a lab would go. On the far left there, we've got the base of where the hotel tower will be coming in, and on the right, just running off the page there, is where the theater shell, or the structure for the theater, will be coming into play as we get further with the design. At that point, we thought, let's just take a look at it. Let's just do a snapshot. We did a quick snapshot of what we had, and then we basically did what a lot of designers do. We just took it into Photoshop, and we just started playing in 2D with it, just to come up with an idea to see if we felt like we were going in a good direction. This was a time in the design process, too, where the whole team started to look at, well, now that we've got the labs, let's begin to think about everything else that has to happen here. And this really opened up a whole nother way of thinking about the design, and opened up, just like we did when we developed this horseshoe plaza at the top, this atrium space. We totally rethought the design of the harbor structure, which originally was just kind of a building in the water with a bridge that led back to the labs. Ruby, why don't you talk about that? Because to us, it's a really important part of Vectorworks, is that we didn't have to feel constricted in our design because we had started a certain direction, that we could make this really broad turn in our design concept.
Yeah, so in essence, Vectorworks was allowing us to take this project through the different evolutions that were necessary as the designs were being developed, particularly with the labs building. And as Steve mentioned, we really moved and shifted from this singular kind of structure out in the water into a more engaged pier structure that created a better, I guess, almost communication between the pier structure and the plaza and the labs building. So it started to become a more cohesive and holistic type of a project. And again, we're working with, for the pier structure here, we're working with massing models and using the symbol technology, the referencing technology, to be able to explore these different iterations without having to disturb the progress that's being made on the design of the labs.
Yeah, just like we did with the theaters, and you can see there's lots of activities going on here. Actually, let's just kind of go through to show this. If we go to a top view here, you'll be able to see a little bit easier the scale of all the pieces, the harbor structure coming out onto the water, and then all the different areas that we have here. The labs we talked about the theater, the conference center, and the hotel section that's going on over there. Just so you know what's happening here, off to the left, we are planning to do the lodging, the resort component that we had. We're going to put in a major restaurant and a diving center anchoring off on the far corner there. And then we also saw a great opportunity with the terrain here to do a whole underground services and retail under the resort. So we're actually going to be getting into some green roofs and doing some really interesting things to provide this corridor that connects out to the restaurant and diving center through the facility, and also serves other functions for the lodging. Then we have a whole park system that we're planning.
And that ties in directly to some of the site modeling capabilities within Vectorworks. And it's allowing us to further articulate the public plaza area and tying it all together with some of the park walk links that we're envisioning, the outdoor entertainment space that ties directly to the harbor space as well, or the harbor structure rather, and also taking advantage of that, that side inlet to create coastal pathways there on the side of the theater.
And then of course we were just talking about the harbor structure, or the whole functioning facility that we're building right out on the water. It was really important to us by the time we got this far in the design that we realized a couple of things at the same time. We were running out of space on the plaza and in the labs for all the functions that had to take place, and we felt a little detached from the water. So we thought, the design team decided, let's just go right down onto the water and let's build our whole facility really at water level so that people can feel like they're involved with the action of the Mediterranean Sea, the waves and everything else that goes on there. That really developed because we were able to go back in and do some sketching right on top of our early concepts and not feel that we were restricted to our early design because we had started to model in one direction. We threw out some of the modeling and said, let's keep it loose, let's keep it sketchy, and let's move to the next. And this is kind of the facility that we decided we wanted to explore. We got for a source of inspiration Peter Eisenman's project, City of Culture in Galicia, Spain. And the thing that we really liked about this, number one, what a challenge for architectural software to have to do something like this. We thought, well, this is great. Let's put Vectorworks through its paces and let's see if we can do this kind of modeling. And number two is we really liked from a design standpoint that we're right out on the Mediterranean Sea, so let's use this rolling architectural feel. And then we really like these deep caverns that are created as you walk through it. You can see in the one photograph there on the bottom that gives such an interesting feel as you're walking through the space, mixing the stone with the glass and the lighting and everything. So we thought, well, this is the approach that we want to take down on the water. Let's just see how we can do that. And that opened up a whole other way of designing that we thought was different than incremental design. And I'll just show you how we kind of model some of these things kind of step by step in Vectorworks. One of the things I really like about Vectorworks is that I tend to think in 2D or in polygon a lot. You know, when I'm drawing, you're drawing in 2D. My mind is thinking in 3D, but my lines are actually 2D, and they represent what my mind is thinking. So I can kind of work the same way in Vectorworks. Starting with polygons and shapes, I know I want kind of a free-form flowing shape, and I can use tools like clipping surfaces, and I can let's clip something else out of it. You know, let's just play with the design. Once I get to something that I want to see in 3D, I can just extrude it up, and then I've got a shape, and I've got the beginning of some modeling ideas. I knew when I got to this point that this is still pretty coarse, like the earlier design we did with the boxes. It's more free-form from a plan view, but not really from the elevations. So I thought, well, let's just go in and let's just change it. Let's go ahead and do some cutting away of the top of it. And I created another polygon, and I simply just drop it down on top of the other shape that was created, and I'll extrude it back. I'm just going to extrude it back. You can see what's going on there. And I think everybody can kind of understand what's going to happen next. I'm basically, well, one thing I can do that's interesting with Vectorworks is using the Pushpull tool set. Which is a lot of fun, Ruby. You've had a lot of experience with that, more than I have, actually.
The Pushpull toolset actually is it's a great tool, especially if you are doing this type of mass modeling, design exploration, a lot of sculpting and so on. It allows you to directly push-pull faces of 3D objects, of 2D objects, just like you're seeing here. It also automatically identifies different working planes in order to push and pull them. So it's a pretty intuitive process.
Yeah. What you do is you just, as Ruby was saying, you just kind of mess with it with these push-pull tools or any other tools you want to use to make the shape, and then you use this great part that I like, which is you subtract solids. So you've got the thing on top and a thing on the bottom, and you're going to subtract these two solids. You're going to have to decide which piece do you want to keep and which part do you want to throw away. Or you can see the box here, retain subtracting object. If you want to keep the top part, you can. In this case, I'm not going to keep it. I'm just going to cut it from the bottom. And then you can see that I'm beginning to get something that is going to move in the direction that I want it to with that free-form shape that you saw. One of the great things about Vectorworks, though, I've made this decision and I've cut away at it and I've done some things, but you know, I can go back in and just by double-clicking on the shape, I can go back and edit the forms that I've created, even though they're invisible to me. This is a non-destructive workflow, so I haven't really created something that I can't back out of. I can back into this piece, double-click on the part that's on top. Let's see, I'll just double-click on this, and then I can adjust it. Here, I'm just going to twist it. I can adjust it any way I want. I can move it up or down. Here, I'm twisting it a little bit. I'm saving it again, and you can see I can keep playing with my shapes. And essentially, that's how this whole pier structure was created, was by just playing with and modifying these subtractive elements that you see floating overhead. They're basically just drop down on top, and they cut away the shape. And you can just do that over and over until you get to something you really think you can work with. And that's how we got to that point in that model. Now, that doesn't seem like anything unusual for 3D modelers, I don't suppose. But the important thing that we'll be getting into is how we maintain all of this rough idea, these concepts, and take it into a BIM workflow without having to recreate everything another time. I want to talk, before I get to that though, about something that we thought we'd try real quick here too. And you see there's kind of this donut hole in the middle of this shape. That's there for a purpose. We wanted an outdoor plaza, and we thought we'd put these giant umbrellas. We got a lot of sun out there, so we thought we would put some big umbrellas out there. You can see this one indicated in yellow is one of the major ones. It's on an axis to the harbor structure out there where you see the boats can come in. And again, we were inspired by Helmut Jahn's Sony Center in Berlin, this giant canopy which provides weather protection and sun protection while still allowing an outdoor feeling. This is kind of what we wanted there. And I'll show very quickly how that was done in Vectorworks, just by 2D elements that are then extruded up, polygons that are repeated. Again, a 2D element is swept 360 degrees and it becomes a dome. And then I just subtract solids, just like you saw in the earlier piece. I go in and I subtract all those extruded polygons right out of that shape. And now I've got my umbrella shape that gives me a starting point, very easy to build and very easy to modify if I want to change it later. And I'll just drop that back onto the model. And that is how I'm going to be building this thing out bit by bit as I design it. As I mentioned a minute ago, I don't want to have to rebuild everything with BIM objects now. I want to move right into a BIM workflow. So, Ruby, you want to tell us a little bit about that using the space planning tools here?
So we have a function, a mode called model to floor plan, and one of the nicest things about this particular menu item is that it allows you, as Steve mentioned, to really move further from this really rough design exploration, these ideas that you have as a massing model, into a more, I'll say, intelligent BIM modeling type of environment by taking these massing models and using them as the basis to start generating building objects such as walls and slabs and roofs and so on. So when you run the model to floor plan command, in essence what it's doing is it's allowing you to pick a particular wall type and use your massing model to begin generating the walls that will begin to be the exteriors of your building. You can keep the massing model and use that for any other changes that you want to make, and then use that massing model to generate other walls if necessary. You use that massing model to begin generating particular surfaces that may be needed, as you see here, to create the roof structure. So we used the extract faces tool that's in your 3D modeling tool set, verified that we wanted to create these surfaces, and you can see that we now have these two new surfaces, which we then used the shell tool in order to give them thickness in order to make this the roof structure.
Yeah, what we wanted to do was again not have to redraw stuff, and we had a complex roof shape. It was it was curving in multiple directions. It's really NURBS tools that we're using in Vectorworks that allows us to have these kind of complex shapes. Here's an example, and I highlighted the roof in red just so you can see it. And we basically took the top of the structure and we just extracted it and said, okay, now we're going to convert that to a roof. And here, the next step on this is to say, well, we see the walls are extending above the roofs, so the next step of this is to go ahead and fit the walls to the object being the roof. So what we're going to do is we're going to tell Vectorworks to say, well, give me a wall, but make it stop where the roof begins. And that's how we were able to, and we repeated this a few times, we were able to go around and make the roof and the walls actually come together the way that we wanted them to give us this form. Now what you see is we actually have BIM walls. We actually have pieces that we can adjust and move as we need that are actual pieces that we can modify and adjust using the conventional BIM tool sets that Vectorworks brings. Now we're just kind of into let's have fun and play with the design mode. Let's add a line of columns having columns following a sweep line that we've created. We're beginning to play with the shape and the form. And this is very easy to do once we've got real walls and real objects. Here we're using the paint bucket tool to just create slabs. And these are real slabs. These can be generic slabs, or they can be very specific as to how they're constructed, what the components are. And you don't have to draw the slab perimeter. You just use the paint bucket tool, and it fills in the slab exactly where you want it. And we can do things like adjust the walls. Here we actually lifted the wall. We truncated it a little bit so that we created a slot. We wanted a slot for lighting to come into the upper deck. We wanted to start putting some windows in, parametric objects, actual window objects that we can move. And so we just began to play with the design as much as we wanted to. We never had to abandon that original massing. We just built on it. We used it to inform our design and to actually create the next level of iteration that we wanted to bring to the project. Here we're offsetting a wall, and we're going to delete the wall that it was offset from, and we're going to trim the surfaces together, or the walls together right here. And all of that, again, adding another column line because we've got an overhead. You know, you can just play. You can have all the fun you want with this. This is what I love about it, because you can just play around and explore your design as much as you want. Here we've added another array of columns, and you can see how this design, as we come around in this sketchy kind of view, we're beginning to get something that we can always examine in kind of a sketchy mode, but we can change as much as we want, because now we're not dealing with these massing shapes that are harder to manipulate. We're dealing with actual BIM surfaces, walls, columns, windows, things that we can use parametric attributes for and design as much as we want. That really brings us to the close of our presentation that's talking about this early phase of design with Vectorworks. But I'm hoping that everybody who's watching this can really see the development from those early sketches that we showed and how this is beginning to take on real architectural form. The next steps that we'll be doing on this really are what we call the boutique hotel, which is attached to the labs. You can see it indicated in the 3D view here. It's kind of the gray box back attached to the left of the labs. We started doing some work on that, and we'll be developing some information on how we're taking that into what we call a full Big BIM story, which is going to be dealing with how you can take an 8- or 9-story hotel and put all the components into it that are going to take it through the whole BIM process.
Correct.
So Ruby's going to have a big hand with that. Wes, a lot of people know Wes Gardner, will be involved in that process as well. And we'll be developing some more webinar material for those folks who want to follow what's happening with this project. Come on over to Vectorworks and or get in touch with Ruby or Wes or myself, and we'll keep you in the loop. Ruby, do you have anything to add as we close out this part of our...
I think that's pretty good conclusion. We can ask Barbara if there's any questions that are coming through for us to answer.
Barbara, if you want to take control.
Hi.
Hi.
No, I'll just say a few words first. Thank you so much. That was so fascinating. It was an outstanding presentation. I want to do two things. I want to book you for another webinar with us, and I want to book a room at the resort. How can I do that?
Excellent. I'm the same way. I'm trying to figure out how I can get in there too.
Okay. Rubina did a great job answering the question as they came. She's such a great multitasker. I'm receiving a couple of more questions right now, so I will assign them to Rubina again and see if she wants to answer them. There's quite a few, and do you see them?
Sure, yeah. So we'll start with this first one, which is, did you use the space planning tools other than converting the mass model for the floor plan?
Well, we haven't used the tool set in the conventional way for those who are Vectorworks users, but we will be using the more conventional use of space planning tools in the hotel complex. I think that's what we're getting to, how we can use the power of the space planning tools. Because we've been dealing in such early conceptual stuff, we thought that we needed a more, well, I may be misspeaking about this, Ruby, you have more experience with space planning tool, but for me, I see it as a tool that's really going to help us in like a hotel when we're laying that out to identify rooms, corridors, services, elevators.
Correct. Yeah, the space planning tools can be used in an early design phase for, I guess, a replacement in essence for something like a bubble diagram.
Yeah.
It has that capabilities. What the space planning tools will also do is help you generate space objects, which can be used in a similar fashion to polygons within Vectorworks, in that they can be used to generate masses, they can be used to generate walls, they can be used to generate other particular pieces through that conversion process. But within this particular project, as you saw, we really just used the model to floor plan function within our space planning tools.
Yeah, the great thing about Vectorworks that I really like is that there's so many different tools you can use in different combinations through the process of your design that you don't really have to follow a prescribed workflow. In this case, we really kind of, instead of space planning tools, we used just those early calculations from a sketch that told us how big things were and what the adjacencies were. And then from that, we built these rough models that became more definitive pieces. But we do want to explore and illustrate for those who want to come in and understand Vectorworks how you can use those more sophisticated tools. It's just that you don't have to use all of the tools all of the time. You can kind of pick and choose depending on what you're doing. I suspect, Ruby, that we'll be using the space planning tools quite a bit in the whole resort housing function that you see on the far left there, not just the hotel. But the resort function, that's going to need a lot of articulation. We've got kind of an interesting kind of jumble of things shown over there, but we're actually beginning to think about how we're going to have patios and plazas and interlocking prefab components and that kind of stuff going on over there.
Yeah. So another question we have is regarding the white model, the white card model, I guess is what we've been calling it. The question is it a specific material, or is it some other way that you've generated? I like the idea of not applying materials but keeping it a generic model. So with the massing models, that was exactly what we had done. We did not apply material to it. We kept it a generic model, and that was apparent with the harbor facility, the harbor structure. With the labs model, even though we were building with the building information tools, the pieces, the walls and the slabs and so on, there's actually an option within the different rendering modes, including the OpenGL rendering mode, which is the interactive kind of rendering mode, to view objects without the textures applied. So it in essence gives you a white card model. So we kind of went both ways. Yeah. We created generic objects that had no textures, no materials associated with them, and then we used particular objects but viewed them without the textures and materials.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can show your work inside of Vectorworks with RenderWorks. The different options that you have are quite substantial. You can have all kinds of different looks for what your audience is. If you're talking to a client or you're just trying to come up with design ideas and you don't want to be too specific about those sorts of things, in my mind, as a designer, I always like things to be this kind of simple shape where I'm looking at shadows and massing, not so much what the materials are. I'm thinking about materials, but I'm not 100% sure where the materials are going to be. And I'm more interested in what is the form looking like, what is the circulation, how's that working, and those sorts of things, scale and all of that.
So another question here says, I'm a Rhino user as well, and I wanted to know if the transition from Rhino to Vectorworks is a smooth transition. Do the masses still have the same properties within Vectorworks? So unfortunately, I am not a Rhino user, but I do know that when you import, you have the ability to directly import a Rhino file. And depending on the complexity of the model that you've created within Rhino, the model will come in really as more of a generic type of model. If it's a very complex NURBS kind of curve-based object, it will come in as a complex mesh object. So a lot of the users I know who are using both Rhino and Vectorworks do go through a kind of conversion of particular objects brought in from Rhino into native Vectorworks objects. a lot of them will run something similar to the model to floor plan and so on. Although Steve was using a number of different tools, unfortunately one of them was not Rhino, but as you can see through the presentation, there was use of Photoshop, there's use of Cinema 4D. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Well, I use Cinema 4D for the more sophisticated animations, like when you saw me spinning around the different floors of the terrace coming in. The nice thing about Vectorworks and Cinema 4D, both being Nemetschek properties, is that the export of Vectorworks into Cinema, and I've used Cinema before I used Vectorworks, the export of Vectorworks into Cinema is so, I'll say, tidy and neat and organized that one of the biggest frustrations I had with Cinema, which was the organization of all the components, was really taken care of for me by Vectorworks. And everything came in so well that all I had to do was set cameras. Frankly, I set a camera that went around, and I turned the floors on and off at certain points in the camera path, and that is all I had to do, and I rendered it out. And Vectorworks just had all of that through layers and classes organized so well in Cinema 4D that it was just a pleasure to do, and I'm really enjoying the connection between Vectorworks and Cinema 4D, because I'm really big on animation and fly-throughs and those sorts of things. You'll see more of those things as we develop the project further, because we really want to get down into the facility and have people walking through the space and experiencing it as a client would want to experience it before it's built, to make sure that they like it. Another important thing I want to mention, because Ruby was talking about NURBS, I don't know how many folks out there are Vectorworks users, but the thing that impresses me about Vectorworks too, being a newer user to it, is the NURBS modeling, the solids modeling, the surface modeling, all three of those primary functions all in one application.
Well, I actually was just going to mention that I think that with this project in particular, it's a good illustration of the fact that you can do a lot of things within Vectorworks and begin to eliminate some of the other products that you might typically turn to. Because I know in my own experience, especially in this early phase, we would use a lot of Sketchup, we would use a lot of Illustrator, and so on and so forth. And as we were going through this project, there was less of the need to really turn to these other tools, and to be able to do it directly in Vectorworks, but then to also move forward with the development of the design within that same application.
Yeah, just a little, one thing that I'm very interested in, because I do import things back and forth, and programs always have. We actually brought a oceanographic research vessel SketchUp that we got from 3D Warehouse into this project. And you can do that easily with Vectorworks, because it has a SketchUp import function, which I find is great, because even Cinema 4D won't let me do that. I have oftentimes imported into Vectorworks a 3D Warehouse object and then exported it to Cinema 4D and used Vectorworks as the bridge. But the thing that you need to know is those 3D Warehouse pieces can be really big and maybe not designed the way you want. In a future webinar that I'm planning on doing right now, I want to show how you can take those SketchUp pieces into Vectorworks, clean them up with a few simple steps to make them much tidier and smaller file pieces, so that you can actually put more of these things into your model with that SketchUp import. That's a whole other story, though. I won't take time on this for that. Anything else, Ruby?
Well, thank you, guys. Oh. No, that was the last question. Thank you so much. And I want to plug a couple of things. At Novedge, you know, we also sell Rhino and Cinema 4D. Just saying.
I like that.
Just saying. I'm now taking control of the screen. Sorry, guys. And let me know if you see my screen now.
We do.
Oh, great. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up, and I want to, from the Novedge team, I want to thank you all for attending this outstanding webinar. I want to remind everybody to visit our page at novedge.com and check out Vectorworks Designer 2014. Novedge is the best way to buy design software online, bar none. For information on the latest specials and releases on a huge array of design software, join the Novedge network and like us on Facebook, Google+, or Twitter. And for more details on future webinars, we encourage you to subscribe to our mailing list. And here it is, the link. To rewatch today's webinar or previous webinars, check out the Novedge Vimeo or YouTube channel. There's a lot to choose from in our playlist. Thanks again for joining us, and have a great day. It's been such a pleasure working with you two. I had a great time, and I hope I'll get together again with Steve and Rubina.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
Thank you, and to the next Novedge webinar. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.